And I'll be sampling some of your feedback even as we proceed with this particular program. Morning Live starts now. My name is Macharia. And at least 15 people have died and 16 others injured following a horrific accident in the Malaha area of Webuye, where a speeding trailer lost control and struck a crowd of bystanders attempting to assist victims of an earlier crash involving a motorcycle. And according to eyewitnesses, the motorcycle had been traveling from Lugulu to Kakamega when it collided with a pedestrian, killing the person instantly. Moments later, a trailer reportedly moving at a high speed ran into people who had gathered to help, causing additional fatalities and injuries. The OCPD of Webuye, Rogers Bosore, confirmed that the accident via phone, assuring the public that a full report will be released once investigations are complete. Authorities have urged residents to exercise caution on busy roads, particularly at night, as overspeeding and poor visibility continue to contribute to fatal incidences.
Iweza kuokoa maisha ya watu 16. Watu 5 walifariki wakipata matibabu hapa katika hospitali. Mmoja kati ya 5 tulijaribu kumfanyia upasuaji, lakini hatukufaulu. Alifariki akipata hiyo huduma katika chumba cha upasuaji.
Huyu ni bibi yangu. Alafu tuko na watoto 4 na ametuachia mtoto baada na nyonya na sina mbele na nyuma.
Hakika walijaribu kumshughulikia maisha yake, lakini ikawa ni ngumu. Alikuwa analia kwa ajili ya watoto, maana ameacha watoto wadogo. Mtoto wake mdogo ni mwaka 1 na wengine bado hata ndio wako CPC.
Watutengenezee matuta ama watutengenezee njia, maana hii njia itamaliza watu wengi. Sababu napo iteremka pali hapa ni mteremko mpaka huko chini. Na trailer inapoteremka inaachilia. Sasa tunaomba ya kwamba serikali kama kuna uwezo wa hii barabara ama ipanuliwe, kila mtu akuwe na nafasi yake ya kupita.
Right, of course, as our sincere condolences pours to the bereaved families and friends. Moving on, Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna has blamed both the county and national governments for poor coordination, saying it significantly contributed to the recent devastating floods in the city. Speaking during a Senate session, Sifuna described the city leadership as shamefully inadequate, noting that the floods caused deaths and affected thousands of families across Nairobi. However, he dismissed claims that senators are directly responsible for such blocked drainage systems, emphasizing that their primary role is to oversee and scrutinize county government operations. Sifuna called for a comprehensive assessment and audit of Nairobi's drainage infrastructure, highlighting that the city has long struggled with deteriorating drainage systems that temporary solutions have failed to resolve the problem. Take a look.
Honorable Speaker, as the leadership in the city, we were deeply embarrassed by what happened in Nairobi on Friday. We have lost over 25 people in Nairobi alone. There is more than 4,000 families that have been affected by the flooding. And Honorable Speaker, what we want to say is our deepest condolences to all of those who have lost their loved ones. Our pole to the people who were affected in one way or by the floods. I know there are members here who were stuck on the road. Many Kenyans were stuck on the road overnight. Honorable Speaker, it was deeply, deeply embarrassing. And I said that as part of that leadership, you will hear no excuses from me. Honorable Speaker, it is quite surprising that a member of this House can forget that we have limited roles as senators. And this House knows the work that all of us have done in terms of oversighting of governance. And therefore, if the expectation from anyone in this House is that Senator for Nairobi is responsible for opening drainages, I think it is the height of hypocrisy, Honorable Speaker. And we can no longer give stories to the public, Honorable Speaker. We want at this particular moment in time to ensure, Honorable Speaker, that there is a comprehensive review of how this entire city drains so that these things don't happen again. I heard somebody say that the rains are things that we expect. It cannot be a surprise. And we know that it will rain again, including this week. But there are simple measures that can be put in place as we await a comprehensive review of how the city drains to ensure that these things don't happen again.
Now, with heavy rains continuing across Kenya, have caused widespread destruction with more than 500 residents of Osodo, Homa Bay County forced to seek refuge in 5 local churches after their homes were submerged. Now the Macharia River burst its banks, leaving a majority of the affected population vulnerable to health risks, including outbreaks of waterborne diseases. The Homa Bay County government, in collaboration with organizations such as the Red Cross, is conducting rescue and relief operations to assist those trapped by flood waters. Residents are now appealing for long-term solutions to the disaster, which has left them displaced and struggling for survival.
Is a vicious cycle of poverty that is really hurting the communities of Wangching Ward each and every perennial year. Today, as we're speaking, we are talking about massive food insecurity because more than 800 acres of lands have been submerged. We are talking about more than 800 acres of grazing lands that have been submerged. And this has really exacerbated matters of wildlife-human conflict. We are also talking about matters to do with triple threat, food insecurity, and even issues to do with health, which is very, very critical, especially water hygiene and sanitation.
We have the number of those who are displaced is 591 people who are displaced. I believe that is very clear. As at yesterday, our data was low, but you realize that between yesterday and this morning, that number increased because of the water flows. We have the elderlies. In that number which is affected, we have 133 elderlies, people who are elderly who are affected. We have the BWDs, we'll not forget the BWDs in our data, that is 32 in number. The pregnant women are 33. Those are also the team which is vulnerable also. We consider them as vulnerable and the disadvantage in the society.
The diking has a 6-kilometer stretch that before the next rainy season, we want to make sure that that stretch is covered. Then we will now assess what damage will be left after that dike has been built all the way. And this is not just for this river, Mirio, there's River Kibwon, there's River Tende. So there are 3 key rivers here that is causing flooding in this Rachonyo area that we are dealing with. So, and this is the place that is most prone to flooding. So if we can finish the diking here in Miriu and do the diking in Tende and do the diking for Kibwon, then we will be covering many families that are displaced year after year.
And President William Ruto has promised that all Kenyans affected by past protests will receive compensation by June this year, provided the ongoing verification process proceeds as planned. Speaking during a joint parliamentary meeting that brought together members of the ruling United Democratic Alliance, that is UDA, and opposition Orange Democratic Movement, that is ODM, the president said that the government has established key systems to ensure that affected families and individuals are paid fairly and transparently. Ruto acknowledged that the process has taken time, but emphasized that the careful approach was necessary to guarantee that compensation is delivered lawfully and with full accountability. And according to the president, victims have already been identified through collaboration with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and the other independent bodies overseeing police conduct, underscoring the government's commitment to addressing injustices that occurred during early demonstrations.
I took the first step and gazetted a victims' compensation panel. It subsequently went to court, and the court held it for a while. Even as the court held it, we did some work. We have identified all the victims, as we talk to you, with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, with the Independent Police Oversight Authority. We have identified all the victims and profiled their names, and we have already made sure that we have a comprehensive list. We did not even stop at 2013. We went back all the way to 2017 to make sure that all those that were affected by protests from 2017 are now captured. So we have already identified all the people in there. We have provided resources. You will be approving 2 billion shillings to make sure that we have the resources to compensate those people. Finally, the court came through and gave direction on how that process should be done. And last week, we now, in compliance with the decision of the court. Last week, we gazetted a panel, as was recommended by the court, to expedite this process. And it is our belief that unless something else happens, we should be able to conclude this exercise before June, so that we can all be in that space. But we are not stopping there. We are saying we want to look at the future. And so I think it will be right for us in this PG to recommend that the Kenya Human Rights Commission propose a law to Parliament on protection of protesters. Let there be a law on how to protect protesters, because it is a constitutional.
The Kenya Pipeline Company has officially listed its shares on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, marking a major milestone for the country's capital markets after an 18-year absence from the formal trading. Speaking at the bell ring ceremony to commence trading, NSE chairperson Kiprono Koni described the listing as resounding votes of confidence in Kenya's capital market. President William Ruto hailed the move as a strategic step in how Kenya finances development, emphasizing that it reduces over-reliance on debt and taxation. The listing allows investors to freely buy and sell KPC shares during market hours, enhancing liquidity and creating new opportunities for wealth creation. Officials noted that the move is part of Kenya's broader strategy to transition from a frontier to a vibrant and growing capital market.
Should not be taken for granted. It has taken many years of discipline, sound policy, and trust building. The political class should not politicize this market. Analysis is correct. It is right to analyze, and it is right to share opinion. But it should not be done in a way that compromises investor confidence.
Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, today's listing is a powerful signal of the growing strength, confidence, and maturity of our economy. It further represents the continuation of the economic reforms we have undertaken to stabilize our economy and restore fiscal discipline. Over the past few years, we have deliberately worked to bring down inflation, stabilize our currency, moderate interest rates, and sustain economic growth. I am particularly encouraged by several milestones achieved through this IPO.
Now, the Democracy for Citizens Party, DCP, has officially condemned the ongoing demolitions targeting small-scale traders in Nairobi, accusing the government of ethnic bias and selective enforcement. In a press statement, DCP leader criticized the demolitions in Githurai, Roysambu, and Huru markets, describing them as a pure witch hunt against traders predominantly from Kikuyu, Meru, and Embu communities. Now, he claimed that the action allegedly carried out under instructions from the CS David Chirchir and President William Ruto are designed to economically displace Gema voters ahead of the 2027 elections. Now, the statement highlighted other areas reportedly under threat, including Tsunami Market, Nyayo Market, Kamukunji Market, Gikomba Market, Molem, and City Cotton. Now, the DCP leader argued that the demolitions are conducted under the cover of night, while large commercial establishments and properties of influential politicians remains untouched.
The risk of being called tribal. We raise issues of humanitarian concerns that are taking the style of targeted ethnic profiling of the Kikuyu, Embu, and Meru communities in Nairobi that is well calculated to rip them off economically by the Kenya National Highways Authority, the Nairobi Governor Sakaja, and William Ruto. I want to say that what is taking place in Nairobi is ethnic profiling that has targeted the people from the Mount Kenya region for destruction, economic ruin, and improved enrichment. The demolitions of Githurai on the night of 18th February targeted members of the Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru. Again, on the 5th of March, in Roysambu, brutal demolition took place, again targeted the members of the Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru. On 8th March 2026, again, at Uhuru Market, the Mount Kenya traders were targeted. Include Tsunami Market in Starehe constituency, Nyayo Market, Kamukuji Market, Ikoba Market, Molem, and Set Cotton. We have information that William Ruto has ordered persecution of the Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru in Nairobi through brutal, inhuman evictions carried out at night and supervised by armed police officers. If the demolitions are genuine, why are they done under the cover of darkness? If it is genuine that public land and spaces should be vacated, why is Western...
Now, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission has raised concerns over the growing wage bill in county governments, saying it plans to work closely with counties to reduce spending on salaries to 35% of total revenue in line with the legal requirements. Speaking in Murang'a County, SRC Chairperson Sami Chepkonyi said that the public wage burden remains a major challenge, noting that only 6 counties have managed to comply with the legal threshold. Chepkonyi emphasized that the counties must take urgent steps to lower their wage bills before the court-imposed deadline, warning that continued overspending on salaries could undermine development projects and service delivery. Meanwhile, Irongo Kangata acknowledged the Murang'a is grappling with a high wage bill, which currently stands at about 51% of the county's budget, far above the recommended 35% limit.
We've been slowing down the growth of the wage bill. Basically making sure that the increases are not as high. We have also been focusing on productivity. So as SRC, we have a program that rewards public sector employees on productivity. And that is going to be the big thing going forward, because we've also realized that Kenya has one of the lowest productivity rates for public service employees.
We are racing strongly towards increasing our revenue without increasing taxes. And also, we are now freezing employment, except now for the very, very critical areas, particularly in the health sectors for the dispensaries that we have opened. But the truth is, Murang'a struggles with the wage bill, and it's an area that requires a lot of thinking.
All right, James Orengo has challenged the government to urgently implement the 10-point agenda agreed upon in ongoing engagements between the United Democratic Alliance and the Orange Democratic Movement, accusing it of failing to address critical issues affecting Kenyans. Speaking in Usonga Ward during a seed distribution exercise, the Siaya governor said that the government had yet to meet the commitments outlined in the agenda despite continued discussions in Parliament. Orengo also criticized what he termed as disruption of public forums, including Linda Mwananchi meetings, and accused authorities of using hired groups to intimidate and silence dissenting voices. The governor insisted that the issues raised in the agenda must be addressed immediately, emphasizing that justice for victims of abductions and killings, youth employment, and women's inclusion in governance cannot be postponed.
If the President Ruto really loves the Luo community and ODM, let him not prevaricate. Let him come out clearly and give an offer we cannot refuse as ODM. Let him give us an offer that we cannot refuse. Today, I understand that the two parties in Parliament, UDA and ODM, are meeting to determine whether or not the point 10 agenda has been achieved. The clear assessment is that it has not been achieved. It's clear as daylight. Abductions have continued. Extrajudicial killings have continued. The government has interfered with public meetings, like the meetings we as Linda Mwananchi have been holding. Everywhere we have gone, we have met goons. The cost of living is still up. Debt is up. Everything is up. And those 10 points agenda We are having a statement in Nairobi tomorrow to determine the real situation insofar as the 10-point agenda is concerned. The 10-point agenda must be actualized now. And if it was being implemented, we don't need to be told that it has been implemented. It should be self-evident. There are some people who are saying that the 10-point agenda is a matter of governance which is continuous. But we are saying abductions cannot continue. Extrajudicial killings must stop now.
Right, here, Member of Parliament Ndimbi Nyoro has opposed the newly established National Infrastructure Fund Act, arguing that the initiative could open the door to increased borrowing instead of delivering genuine development projects. Speaking during the official opening of the Mwai Kibaki Senior School, the Kerala MP warned that the Kenya is already borrowing approximately 1.5 trillion Kenya shillings annually, a trend he said that continues to place a growing financial burden on citizens. Nyoro further expressed concern that key social sectors, particularly education, are already suffering from inadequate funding. He noted that the reduced allocation of resources has significantly affected learning institutions and slowed development within the education sector. However, while assenting to the bill earlier this week, at State House Nairobi, William Ruto defended the new law, saying that the National Infrastructure Fund will help bridge Kenya's infrastructure financing gap.
The fact that the Kenya ililaunched jana, that fund is meant to borrow more money outside of the budget. Na sio vizuri tuendelee kubebesha wa Kenya mzigo kwa sasa na tuwabebeshe mzigo hata wa kesho. Ni vizuri tuache hii mambo ya kukopa sana. Sasa nchi ya Kenya, as we talk, tunakopa trilioni 1.5 sasa. Hii kizungumiki tunapewa. Ati for every 1 shilling, ati Kenya wants to crowd in another 12 shillings. It is another name of saying, kwa shilingi moja, Kenya inataka ikope shilingi ingine 12. So, mimi nauliza viongozi ambao wenye wako. Nani wamewaambia Kenya inaenda pahali? Ya kwamba sasa mnataka Kenya ibebe mzigo ivujike. Kenya tunahitaji maendeleo sasa, lakini also in posterity tunataka hii development.
Now, the Orange Democratic Movement office in Kisumu County has confirmed the postponement of county party elections that were initially scheduled for March 6, citing as tense and political environment. In a statement, party officials said that the decision was made following guidance from Oburu Odinga, who warned that the prevailing atmosphere, coupled with alleged external interference, could undermine the integrity of the electoral process. Party leaders have now urged members to shift their focus towards strengthening the party through membership recruitment and voter registration, insisted to holding authorized meetings or activities. Meanwhile, Kisumu ODM chairperson Paul Otieno Akeyo has convened a delegates meeting bringing together representatives from all 7 sub-counties. The meeting is scheduled for March 13 and is expected to prepare the county ahead of the ODM National Delegates Conference slated for March 27th.
It has been noted that there are several purported party meetings being held in different places within the county which are not known to the party leadership. We advise that instead of purporting to campaign for the election that has been postponed, the same energies should be channeled towards the recruitment of ODM membership and mobilization for voters registration.
We abide by the directives of the party leader as we wait for further directives. And we want to urge the party members in this county, that is Kisumu County, to remain calm as stated by our chair.
This is a time that ODM in Kisumu County has been put to test, but we are equal to the task. We are going to pass that test. Let nobody be cheated that the party is fragmenting. If anything, such kind of a healthy decisions make the party more stronger, and we are going to come out very, very strong.
All right, Kenya Member of Parliament Ndindi Nyoro has proposed that the Nairobi-Thika-Isiolo Highway be renamed the Mwai Kibaki Economic Corridor in honor of Kenya's third President Mwai Kibaki. Speaking during a social opening of the Mwai Kibaki Senior School, Nyoro described the late leader as an economic giant whose administration laid the foundation for key infrastructure projects that transformed Kenya's development landscape. The Kenya Member of Parliament noted that the highway linking Nairobi, Thika, and Isiolo was among the landmark projects initiated during Kibaki's tenure, and according to Nyoro, renaming the road after the former head of state would be a fitting tribute to his legacy and contributions to the Kenya's economic growth. Nyoro added that such a move would help preserve the memory of President Mwai Kibaki and remind future generations of his role in driving economic reforms and a large-scale infrastructure development across the country.
Mwai Kibaki alifanya jukumu yake. Ni vizuri aheshimike. Na mimi nauliza kwa heshima hata kwa nchi ya Kenya. Ile barabara inatoka Nairobi, inaenda Thika, inaenda all the way to Isiolo, na inaenda mpaka Moyale. Mimi ningetaka kama Kenya tukubaliane hiyo corridor road yote, hiyo highway iitwe Mwai Kibaki Highway kwa kukumbuka ile kazi alifanya. Because vitu zingine tunaweza kosa kuziogea. But I have come to realize also as a leader that the decisions that we make as leaders account for so much when it comes to the progress of our country. Wakati Mwai Kibaki alikuwa rais wa Kenya, si ati Kenya ilifubua mafuta ama tukapata gold ama minerals. Uongozi bora ndio alileta katika nchi ya Kenya na nchi ya Kenya ikaenda mbele.
Now, families of victims who died in a 2023 explosion at a gold mine owned by Karebe Gold Mining Limited gathered outside the Kapsabet law courts calling for justice for their loved ones. The relatives arrived at the court carrying placards and urging authorities to ensure accountability for the tragedy that occurred on January 23rd of 2023. In Chamase ward, they said that they have continued to live with grief and an unanswered question for more than 2 years since the fatal incident. The explosion, allegedly linked to illegal mining activities, claimed the lives of 3 people and left 6 others seriously injured. Affected families say that they are yet to receive satisfactory explanations from regarding the circumstances that led to the deaths of their kins.
This case touches on events that happened on 23rd January 2023, where a faction of local miners who are extracting illegally and who have actually had a long-seated rivalry with Karebe Gold Mining Limited entered into one of their mining shafts and blasted a barricade that ended up killing 3 workers of Karebe Gold Mining and injured 6 others fatally.
Today we are coming in court for hearing of the said case, but unfortunately due to unforeseen circumstances and the changes in the High Court, now just judges are being appointed, others are being transferred, so the court had no choice but to adjourn the matter. It was not our wish and the wish of the victims that the matter be adjourned today, but unfortunately we had to accept that issue and for the matter to be given a fresh date. Now for the victims, it has been a hell of a time. The action happened in 2023. We are now in 2026, 3 years later. We have been coming to court, ready to proceed, fully armed with all our evidences, advocates ready. But unfortunately, due to the unforeseen circumstances, we had to give in to the issue of the matter being adjourned. So they have a right. I believe this is a way of protest that 3 years is a long time for a criminal proceeding to proceed. So as an advocate of the victim, I'm very happy to say with those placards, red in color, signifying that blood was shed illegally. So when you see them with placards here, this is a way of protest because this is a courtroom and we are not allowed to make noise in court. They are using it as a symbol to signify that blood was split. It was not legal, it was illegal. So they have a right to carry it. They are displaying names of the victims who are injured, names of those who lost their lives. So as the advocate, I'm very happy to say them with those placards today.
Meru County Senator Kaduri Murungi, in collaboration with County Commissioner Jacob Ouma, has distributed government-provided food aid to schools in need across the county, aiming to support students and reduce hunger-related challenges in learning. Now, the distribution covered both primary and day secondary schools in Tigania West, Tigania East, Buori constituency, North Imenti, Central Imenti, and South Imenti. Senator Murungi said that efforts are underway to extend support for other parts of the county to ensure that all schools in need benefit from the program. Speaking during the exercise, Murungi expressed gratitude to the government for the initiative, noting that it will enable many students to continue with studies without the disruption caused by food shortages.
Najua mashule yetu sana mashule ya day secondary schools kuna shinda mingi sana kwa watoto wale wanasoma. Na ile shinda kubwa ni chakula. Hakuna kitu kingine. Walimu wako, vitabu iko, lakini chakula ndio shinda. Kwa hivyo hii sio chakula ya kuliwa kama mwaka moja, no. Hata kama ni siku moja itasaidia watoto wale hawakuja. Ama namna gani walimu? Kwa hivyo hata kama ni itakaa wiki moja, hiyo ngunia 5 ama ngapi itasaidia hiyo shule. Tumekuwa na ripoti kule kwa commissioner amesema kiangazi kutoka mwezi wa 11 mpaka Februari. Tena mvua imekuja kama wakulima wajajipanga. Tuko na shida nyingine kwa commissioner. Mvua imekuja mingi lakini wakulima wengi bado hawajapata fertilizer, hawajapata mbegu. Kwa hivyo kuna shinda pia, lazima tuambie wakulima nao wachangamke, waende kwa shamba, wakimbize mbegu kupanda. Ndio pia mwezi wa 6, second term, isikuwe na shida tena.
Doris, head teacher CCM Good Shepherd, located at Koje Estate. Kwa niaba ya all HOIs, all ends of institutions, board of management, our parents and the learners, we are very grateful. Thank you so much Mheshimiwa kwa ile kazi umeona. Hakika tumeona wewe ni kiongozi. You lead, others follow. Umetungangania kule, umetuletea chakula. Ukweli umejua mahali watu wamefinyiliwa sana. Ukirudi kule, salimia Dr. William Samoei Ruto. Mwambie yeye ndio baba yetu, ndiye tunaweka tena, na hata ikiwezekana 3 term kama itawezekana, tuko na yeye ndani. Yeye na deputy president na senator wetu na governor, sisi tuko 2 term.
Alright, it is exactly 34 minutes past the top of the hour. We are due for a short breather here on Morning Live, but when we come back, we'll tell you what exactly the newspapers are saying. Don't go too far. All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching EBN television. This is Morning Live. And let's take a look on what you're waking up to as far as the dailies are concerned. Of course, I'm having the Daily Nation newspaper this particular morning, and as well as the Standard newspaper, dated today, the 11th day of March 2026. Now, top story on the Daily Nation says that uproar over new NTSA instant fines, and there is a competition suit, a court petition suit seeking the suspension of the system, arguing that it denies offenders' rights to fair hearing. Now, public participation PSV operators say the concept is good, but implementation is flawed. All right, and the loopholes lawyers say that the system is prone to abuse, and there is no recourse against unfairness, and as well as on matters revenue. Consumer lobby wants full disclosure on deal between NTSA and Pesaprint. Of course, you'll remember that this particular week, the NTSA actually issued, fines to offenders, including those who use the pedestrian pathway, to drive along the pedestrian pathways. They have their fines actually, and some other stipulated fines related to the charges. that they'll be going to pay. And resistance to the new automated tariff fines system is growing, with a court petition and interest groups citing lack of public participation, inability to challenge the punishment, and loopholes open to abuse. The National Transport and Safety Authority rolled out the instant tariff fines management system, which has seen motorists captured on CCTV cameras violating rules like breaching speed limits, like being slapped with the charges to curb reckless driving. Now, fines must be paid within 7 days of the SMS notification, failure to which interest charges will accrue, and that offenders also risk further restrictions like blocked from accessing NTSA digital services. And however, this has infuriated public transport operations, consumer groups, private motorists, and rights advocates who argue that the system offends the Constitution and warns that it could fuel corruption and punish motorists. Right? Now, the issues raised by the matatu operators actually include no public participation before implementation, no civic education before rollout, fines remains too high for operators, and will continue to encourage corruption, and system fails to consider the temporary employment of drivers and conductors, and will thus punish owners. Right? That's on matters NTSA and the fines and the charges that the motorists will actually accrue if they violate these traffic rules. And of course, I don't know what's your take on this. What will, these fines will actually, reduce, the number of accidents and traffic violations that, motorists actually, do. And of course, if just in case you've been to Nairobi Central Business District, you can actually see, some, traffic offenses, minor traffic offenses, which actually result to deaths, fatalities. Someone may actually decide to ignore the traffic lights, and or someone may actually use the pedestrian pathways, which sometimes lead to fatalities of the pedestrians and bystanders, and of course the roadside sellers. And as for me, personal view, I feel that these fines actually will reduce the number of fatalities in regards to road accidents that we actually see on our roads. Actually, this particular morning when I was coming to work, I came using a public service vehicle, and somewhere around drive-in, the driver actually said that actually told the conductor that hapa kuna cameras, and of course akisimamisha hapo, the NTSA will actually send an SMS to him. Of course, the charges will actually, he will incur the charges at that point. And I feel like, they have been doing this, and that now that they know that the cameras are now actually working, they're actually avoiding, this, such instances. Of course, I feel that, this will actually reduce the number of fatalities, the number of, reckless driving in our roads. Of course, that's actually a good move by the NTSA. I don't know what's your take on that. Tell us through our SMS line to 3059. Our WhatsApp line is working at 07406534453. All right, moving on to other stories making headlines. On the Daily Nation, Kenya looks at speed cameras and AI to boost road safety. And across the world, automated traffic enforcement systems, the use of speed cameras and instant fines have become central tools in road safety policy. Several countries in Europe, North America, Asia, and parts of Africa have adopted such systems with varying levels of success, of offering useful comparisons for Kenya's emerging era of instant tariff fines. One of the most widely cited examples is the experience of the United Kingdom, where speed cameras were introduced in the early 1990s as part of a broader road safety strategy. Over the following decade, road deaths in the UK dropped significantly. Nairobi hopes that, to borrow from the global successes, NTSA Director General Nahashon Kondiwa said, and of course in Australia, in a traffic camera records an offense, the notice goes to the registered owner and of the vehicle. If it is owned by a company, the company must nominate the actual driver who was behind the wheel at the time, right? Of course, I feel that this actually a good move, because when you overspeed, it sends you an SMS instantly, all right? And you actually fine instantly. Of course, this traffic cameras have actually also, heightened security across our regions. You can see in cases of, you'll remember that the case of Ngondowere, who was actually murdered when he was from Parliament. You can actually, investigators actually used the traffic cameras to assess the situation in that particular road. So it is quite a good move, one may argue. All right, moving on to other matters. A scene from hell. Truck owner that claimed 15 lives in the buoy that was actually yesterday, that is in Bungoma County. What began as a roadside crowd gathering around a minor border accident scene ended in great tragedy when a truck lost control and plowed into the group on the Kitale-Webuye highway Monday night, killing at least 15 people. Among the dead were 6 members of one family and 3 from another household. Now, the horror was thrown Malaha village on the outskirts of Webuye town, Bungoma County, into mourning as relatives, neighbors, and friends attempted to come to terms with the loss. Now, the tragedy occurred around 8 p.m. when the truck driver reportedly lost control and plunged into the crowd that had gathered at an accident scene involving motorcycles. Grief hangs heavy at the home of Mr. Ezekiel Kinosu. The accident led to the death of his mother, 3 brothers, and 2 other family members. Right, and according to Mr. Kinosu, his relatives had joined other curious locals who had gathered to the motorcycle accident scene. Moments later, a speeding truck from Lugulu plowed into the crowd. Of course, it is quite unfortunate, to lose 6 family members. Right, you can imagine how, the funeral will look like. Budgeting for a funeral of 6 people. Quite unfortunate, of course. Sincere condolences pours to the bereaved families and friends. All right, moving on to other stories making headlines. House teams okay sale of government shares in Safaricom. Now, the Parliament Committee has approved the sale of government shares in Safaricom to Vodacom South Africa, paving the way for Treasury to receive about 244 billion from the transaction. Now, the National Assembly Public Debt and the Privatization in Finance and National Committees sought approval from MPs of the sale of 15% government stakes in Safaricom, a move expected to raise 200 billion Kenya shillings alongside an additional 40.2 billion Kenya shillings payment by Vodacom in lieu of future dividends. Now, the report on the partial sale of government shares in Safaricom was tabled by Public Debt and Privatization Committee chairperson, that is Abdi Shuria. The team made several recommendations, including a requirement that the transaction should not result in the dismissal of Safaricom employees. It also wants the National Treasury to ensure that within 10 years of the investiture, there will be no material change to Safaricom's current shared prosperity business model and could disadvantage the company's dealers, agents, and other business partners. Now, the committee also proposed that the sale takes effect on April 1st of 2026 or on later dates or once regulatory approvals have been obtained. Of course, you'll remember when this was actually a contentious debate, among members of parliament and members of public as well, who other people actually cited that, the government should not actually, sell its shares to Vodacom. All right, and of course, we actually saw the public participations being held. They are saying that, they're holding public participations to consult the public on whether or not to, to sell these particular shares. And now this is actually in place. It is actually expected to take place, or to take effect on April 1st of 2026. That is actually next month. And I don't know what's your take on that in regards to the public participation and, the PR exercises that were done in regards to these shares and, of course, the debates in Parliament. All right? Were they considered in this particular sale? Of course, that's a story on page 3 of the Daily Nation this particular morning. Now let's take a look on other stories making headlines on the Daily Nation. And Aga Khan sells stake in Nation Media Group. Now, the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development has entered into an agreement to sell its stake in the Nation Media Group PLC to Tarifa Limited. That's the story on page 5 of the Daily Nation. Now, let's take a look at that. Now, the Aga Khan Fund for the Economic Development SA has entered into an agreement to sell 100% of its shareholding in the National Media Group to Tarifa Limited, which is owned by Tanzanian businessman Rostam Azizi. Mr. Azizi has vast business interest across multiple sectors including media, mining, telecommunications, agriculture, real estate, port facilities, energy, and construction. Now, AFCAD, in a statement released yesterday, announced that it had entered into an agreement to sell its entire shareholding in NPRT Holdings Africa Limited to Tarifa Limited. NPRT holds 54.08% shareholding in the Nation Media Group. Now, the transaction marks the end of AFRED's 66 association with Nation Media Group, which began in 1959. All right, that's a story as well on page 5 of the Daily Nation. And of course, as well on page 4, 2 billion Kenya shillings for victims of police brutality as Ruto Oburu from coalition talks team. Of course, you will remember that yesterday, the ODM party, that is the Orange Democratic Movement, and the ruling party, the United Democratic Alliance, which is actually spearheaded by the head of state, President William Ruto, actually had a meeting yesterday in regards to the 10-point agenda, which was actually signed between him and the late former party leader and Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, which actually brought these two parties in what they term as the broad-based government. All right. Now, yesterday they had a meeting, in regards to that, seeing where are we at in regards, or as far as the 10-point agenda is concerned. And of course, the head of state actually said that they have actually allocated 2 billion Kenya shillings for victims of police brutality as Ruto Oburu from coalition talks team. Right now, President William Ruto and ODM leader Oburu Oginga have constituted an 8-member technical committee to spearhead the 2027 pre-election coalition roadmap, even as they announced plans to compensate victims of police brutality by June. Now, each of the two parties is set to pick 4 members, with UDA Executive Director Nicodemus Bore and his ODM counterpart Odur Ongwen as serving as joint secretaries of the team. President William Ruto said that 2 billion Kenya shillings is available in the supplementary budget to facilitate reparations for the families of those killed as well as of those injured in protest. Compensation of victims of protest was, one of the items of the 10-point agenda signed between President William Ruto and the late ODM party leader Oburu Oginga on March 7th of 2025. That's the story as well on page 4 of the Daily Nation this particular morning. Now let's turn on to matters healthcare and crisis talks to resolve teachers' share grievances. Health Cabinet Secretary, that is Aid Ndwale, has moved to forestall a crisis between the Social Health Authority and teachers who have threatened to pull out of the scheme, citing poor quality of services. That's on matters healthcare. That's on page 7 of the Daily Nation. And 6 relatives among 15 killed in Obuya. We had taken a look at that on page 3 of the Daily Nation as well. Let's take a look on matters making headlines in the Standard newspaper this particular morning. And on the front page of the Standard newspaper this morning, headline is actually Pipeline, the truth behind pipeline. Of course, this is actually a story that has been making headlines, the KPC, right? And there is a picture there of the head of state as well, and the head of state of Uganda, as you can see on your screens. And it actually says, fearing the Kenyan Pipeline Company IPO would flop, President William Ruto's administration bent over backwards to secure Uganda's participation, granting Kampala sweeping influence over one of Kenya's most strategic energy assets. Uganda National Oil Company emerged with a 20.15% stake 2 board seats and veto power over the appointment of the KPC's chief executive and pipeline tariffs. Now, critics, one, that the concessions hand a foreign government unprecedented sway over Kenya's fuel lifeline, raising alarm that Nairobi may have traded energy sovereignty for a political convenient IPO success. That's as well on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. It actually says that 21% Uganda, through the Uganda National Oil Company, brought about 20.15% of KPC, making its largest single strategic investor after the Kenyan government. All right, and of course there is a KPC share distribution graph that is actually there on the front page of the Standard newspaper. Now let's take a look at that particular story on page 4 of the Standard. And the fears that many Kenyans have expressed on Kenya's strategic assets being controlled by the foreigners may have come to pass after completion of the Kenyan Pipeline Company's initial public offer, which saw Uganda emerge as the key shareholder. Now, Uganda, through its national oil company, will now own 20.15% of KPC, a significant stake in the entity that runs the fuel transport and distribution infrastructure, ensuring the security of fuel supply in Kenya. Now, the Ugandans will also have to control the firm after successfully negotiating for 2 seats at KPC's board of directors, as well as the veto powers in the executive officer. Now, observers across board say Uganda did not just buy a stake, but control KPC, and that Kenya has handed its energy independence to a foreign entity. Now, the seeming take over KPC by Uganda is unlike the opaque offshore investors that an analyst had earlier warned would be used by local businesses and the political elite to gain control of the strategic entity. All right, and 2.56% is actually, Kenya retail stakeholders, and KPC employers actually take 0.06%. And foreign investors, excluding EAC, that is 0.02%, and as well as the oil marketing companies, 0.014%. Other East African investors take 1.07%, and the Uganda, that is the Uganda National Oil Company, takes 20.15%, and the National Treasury takes 35%. Right, that's on page 4. And I don't know what you make of this. The government lately has, we actually saw the incident which happened at JKIA. The government allegedly wanted to sell JKIA to Adani. Now the KPC is actually handed over to KPC. The KPC is actually handed over to Uganda. All right, Safaricom shares being handed over to Vodacom, South Africa. All right, then we'll ask the question, what is actually happening with our institutions? Are we incompetent to run, these institutions? And why is the government actually, selling these institutions to other, private investors in other countries? All right, what are your thoughts on that? Tell us through SMS line 23059, and as well as on our Facebook page, EBN TV Kenya. All right, moving on. Showdown looms of a minority leader position. Now, a showdown pitting the large Azimio coalition and the fractured Orange Democratic Movement ODM party is now looming in the National Assembly over the occupies the position occupies the position of the leader of minority. Now on Monday, Azimio de-whipped Suna East Member of Parliament Junaid Mohammed from the position of the leader of the Azimio coalition, the parliamentary group in the National Assembly, replacing him with Suban South Member of Parliament Karoli Omondi. Now the move, the latest on a political chessboard, pitching Azimio leader and former President Uhuru Kenyatta and President William Ruto, now sets the stage for an intensified scramble for the leader of minority position in the House. Now, while Junaid still occupies the position of the leader of minority, the decision by the Uhuru-backed Azimio coalition communicated intent to seize control to the seat from ODM, whose members have explicitly expressed intent to work with President William Ruto's United Democratic Alliance. Now, granted, the procedure to ensure the removal of Junet as the minority leader, with which commences with the holding of the group meeting and ends in the resolutions of the same being tabled on the floor of the House, was not followed, meaning that he continues to hold the post, but while no longer wear the hat of the Azimio Coalition parliamentary group leader. All right, that's on page 5 on Matters Politics on the Standard newspaper this particular morning. All right, now let's take a look on the motorists, which actually sued NTSA for rolling out instant fines. And let's take a glance at some of the fines that have been stipulated by the NTSA. Now, speeding will attract varying fines based on the speed limits in specific areas. All right. Now, exceeding speed limits by 16 to 20 kilometers per hour above the required will attract a fine of 10,000 Kenya shillings, and exceedingly the limit by 11 to 15 kilometers per hour will attract a fine of 3,000 Kenya shillings. Now, driving on pavement or a pedestrian walkway will attract a fine of 5,000 Kenya shillings, while causing obstruction will attract a fine of 10,000. Now, failing to display lifesaver when a car stalls will attract a fine of 3,000, and failure to stop when waved down by a police officer in uniform will attract a fine of 5,000 Kenya shillings. Right, and of course, we actually saw that yesterday, motorists, sued the National Transport and Safety Authority, that is NTSA, following the introduction of instant fines for traffic offenders. In his case, filed before the High Court, Kennedy Maingi Mutweri argued that the such instant fines system denies motorists the opportunity to be heard before a fine is imposed. Now, the system, which uses cameras placed on major highways, will be able to detect the speed of vehicles, drivers driving on pavements, and failure to observe road signs. Also targeted are drivers causing obstruction and failure to display lifesavers when a vehicle stalls, among other offenses. NTSA has indicated that traffic violations detected through the system automatically trigger the issuance of fines, which are communicated to motorists through short message services, that is SMS notifications. However, Mwangi stated that the authority ignored a High Court judgment which ruled out the possibility of punishing a traffic offender without their day in court. Now, there is an instance that trended in early this year, maybe on January or on February, which occurred on around Resambu area, where a man was actually seen, standing in front of a bus. The bus was actually, making its way on a pavement, to avoid traffic jam. Now, the man actually stood there until, the bus, reversed and, entered its lane. And, people argued, passengers in that particular vehicle, abused that particular man. And when someone is actually on board of that vehicle, may not see the risk. Someone may actually say, I'm arriving early to where, I'm heading to, but you don't actually see the risk of, people actually dying, losing their lives when, this particular driver decides, to use the pavement, to evade traffic. And of course, I see, these fines actually, coming at the right time, where, some of the drivers are actually stubborn. And, with these fines imposed, at least we actually see, some sort of respect in our roads, all right? And, the high resolution CCTV will actually give clear evidence that you are speeding. That's according to NTSA Director Nahashon Kondiwa, all right? That's on page 3, exclusively on page 3 of the Standard newspaper. And KRA introduces body cameras for custom officers. Now, Kenya is among the first African countries to deploy body-worn cameras for custom officers, a move aimed at enhancing transparency, accountability, and professionalism in operations at the country's border entry points. Now, the Kenya Revenue Authority, that is KRA, yesterday launched the cameras at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Now, the 350 devices will be used by custom officers operating at airports, inland container depot, and one-stop border ports. KRA Commissioner General Humphrey Watanga said that the introduction of the cameras marks a significant step in modernizing customs administration and strengthening oversight in border management. Now, he noted that customs officers play a key role in protecting the country from illicit trade, smuggling, and the prohibited goods, while facilitating legitimate trade that supports economic growth. And of course, I feel like the government ought to put these cameras to all officers, because many a times you can't actually move from one destination to another without seeing, the driver of that particular PSV vehicle, bribing a traffic officer, right? And I feel like, these officers, all of these officers, including the traffic officers, the national police officers, including, during protest, when one has a body camera, you'll actually see, what's transpired in, in their engagements, right? And this is quite a good move by the government, installing cameras on the custom officers at the border, to avoid smuggling and of course illicit trade to the country. Right, moving on to a story that made headlines yesterday, where families recall final moments before flood victims went mute. Now, grief hung heavy in the Nairobi corridors of the Nairobi Funeral Home as distraught families gathered, clutching photographs and documents, hoping for answers about relatives who vanished during last week's floods. Now, for many, the search that began in panic ended in heartbreak when they identified the bodies of their loved ones at the morgue. Nixon Murunga said that the family had been searching for his sister who lived in Kawangware with her 11-year-old son. Beg your pardon. And the victim's body was discovered in a tunnel near Pan-Africa Hotel, where she usually took a matatu. Now, a similar tragedy befell the family of an 18-year-old female, Philip Omondi. His father, James Munga, said that Omondi was in a private vehicle with his friend around Timol on Langat Road when they encountered fast rising water on the road, leaving them stranded among stored vehicles. But the call suddenly stopped, and his body was taken to the morgue at 4 a.m. on Saturday. And as well for Matano Makungu from Taita Taveta County, the journey to Nairobi ended in sorrow after he confirmed the death of his uncle, Sheila Ramadan Matano. On Monday, Ramadan's body was discovered floating near a garage in South Sea. Right, it's quite unfortunate, and we hope that the government will actually see a way on how to compensate they that lost their businesses, because we actually saw some of the businesses were actually went on a loss in regards to the floods, and it's quite unfortunate to see the county government actually faulting the Mona Inchi, saying that it is the Mona Inchi actually clogging the drainage, and what about, of course, I believe it's lies squarely with the national government and the county governments to ensure that this does not happen. Each and every time there are heavy rains, we must lose people, and the national government as well as the county governments ought to see a way on how to to curb this trend. All right. Of course, our condolences to the bereaved families and friends who lost their lives last Friday, where Nairobi and 14 counties actually witnessed flash floods. All right. Moving on, hundreds of more families displaced and farms destroyed. This is actually in regards to the disaster the flood disaster, and more families have been displaced as heavy rains continue to wreak havoc across the country. Yesterday, 593 families moved to evacuation centers in Homa Bay as floods continued to affect Osodo and Chwoe villages. By yesterday, about 2,800 families had been displaced. Now the displaced are camping at the Osondo Primary School, Osondo Nyando SDA Church, and 3 other churches after River Miriu broke its banks. In Kericho, at least 6 households comprising more than 50 people have been displaced after a landslide in Kepepo village in Kunyakwa, that is in Kepkelon West. The Kenya Red Cross estimates about 2.5 hectares of land were affected. Residents are counting losses after crops, including coffee, were swept away alongside livestock. That's a story as well on page 2 of the Standard newspaper this particular morning. And family 6 helped to recover body of man swept away. Now, a family in Kitengela, that is in Kajiado County, is yet to recover the body of their kin who was swept away by raging floods last week. Now the family is now appealing to the government to help them retrieve the body of Robert Kibe Njuguna, that is 6-year-old, and according to his brother Martin Ngogi, Kibe was on his way back home from work when he was swept away. Now they accused Kitengela municipality personnel for failing, or they accused the Kitengela municipality personnel for failing to their duty and for not responding to their request to have the body retrieved. Scholar Jerry, a deceased workmate, recalled how the incident happened, and she said, and I quote, "We were lucky to have crossed the seasonal river before him. However, we realized the floods were strong and pleaded with him not to proceed, but he declined." Right now, the incident has come barely a week after another middle-aged woman was swept in Wama village, 1 kilometer from the scene. And ongoing rains have also affected learning, with some schools reporting a drop in attendance, while some learners are reporting late. All right, that's a story on page 2 of the Standard newspaper this particular morning. You're now up to speed with those waking up to this particular morning as far as the governance of this particular country is concerned. Thank you so much for keeping me company until this particular minute. It is exactly 16 minutes past the top of the hour. Of course, we shall be keeping tabs with these developing stories. Of course, we shall be bringing you in our subsequent bulletins later on in the day. My name is Martin Macharia. Do have yourself a lovely day. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. And as always, let's do this again when God says we do.